It from the CDC shows the United States birth rate increased just 1% last year. The number of American women having children has been trending downward for decades, and now the White House is floating ideas for how to change that. One proposal includes a $5,000 so-called baby bonus to every mother after delivery. Steve Ratner now over at the Southwest Wall with some charts on this. All right, so you have more details, Steve, first of all, about the declining birth rates, and then we'll get into why this is happening. But why don't you start with those first numbers?
Yeah, and we're also going to get into why the White House is so focused on this, because it dovetails with another very interesting issue that's going on. But first, let's take a look at what's been happening. So birth rates have actually been dropping across the world for a long time, and for various different reasons that you can imagine. But we'll just focus on the U.S. down here. So back in the 1950s, the so-called baby boomer era, of which I was one, the birth rate peaked at about 3.7 children per family. I was born right over here, it was a little over 3 then. We had 3 kids in my family. That was pretty typical. But then it's come down, 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 and now we're sitting down here at 1.6%. At 1.6 births per mother, sorry about that, and Europe, China being even below us. Now, what are the implications of that? The implications of that are actually quite serious, which is what happens to our population. 1.6 is well below what we call the replacement rate, the number of kids a mother has to have in order simply to keep our population stable, let alone growing. And of course, keeping our population growing is really important, because otherwise you have fewer and fewer working people supporting more and more people who are elderly, and that raises all kinds of fiscal and budgetary and cost issues for the economy and for the government. So on present course and speed, without any immigration, our population would peak very, very soon in the next 10 or so years, around 2038. And then it would continue to decline, and it will go from 330 million now down to 294 million. The difference would, in a normal world, be made up with immigration. We allow about this many people to immigrate. Roughly about 900,000 people a year is the average. And so if you assume that the average of 900,000 continues, our population grows slowly to 366 million. And this is where you get into the whole question of immigration. And we know this administration has a different policy on immigration, which is part of why they're talking about things like these $5,000 credits to try to get parents to have more kids.
And Steve, it's an issue that Elon Musk in particular has been talking about a lot. Pronatalism is a popular movement, especially in some conservative circles. Is that also tied to immigration?
Yeah, I think this whole narrative out of there, J.D. Vance called women childless cat ladies. The whole narrative out of there about children and so forth is a mix of, Elon Musk has, we think, 14 children plus or minus, his belief in more children, but also the fact that without that you're going to have immigration, and this is not an administration dying to have a lot more immigration.
All right, so you got the numbers. That's a good backdrop for why this has been happening. What's changed, Steve?
Well, it's interesting, and there are polls and things, and everybody on the set's opinion, it would be as good as mine on this. But here's one poll anyway, with a whole variety of reasons, and these don't add up to 100 because people had multiple answers. They had several different reasons. Some say they just don't want to. There seems to be some kind of a cultural shift going on out there about having kids and the relevance of a family to one's life. Focus on other things, concerned about the world, can't afford to raise one. We're going to come back to this because I think in these sort of more vague answers, I suspect some of this can't afford is embedded up here somewhere. Concerns about the environment, right partner, don't like children. 20% don't like children. I don't know who those are. And then roughly 20% had negative experiences with their own family growing up. But the affordability thing is, I think, a big part of this and a big deal. So let's take a look at something involving that. So if you want to look at housing and health care, if you go back to 1984, and you divide the country into 5 sections based on income, so top 20%, next 20%, and so forth. Let's see what's happened. So average home prices have gone up like this, which meant that they have outstripped even people very close to the top. Out-of-pocket health care also has gone up a lot, but not quite as much as incomes for people very much at the top. But everybody else down here, the 80, 60, 40, 20, all these people below 80, have had to face much higher housing, much higher health care costs relative to their incomes, and so affordability becomes a real problem for these families.
Steve, it's so interesting. It sort of underscores these reasons on how individual the decision of whether or not to have children is. Let's assume people who don't like children are not the target audience for this message. But when you look at other people who have either chosen not to have children or have fewer children than they might have had in the past, to what degree can the government effectively encourage them to have more children through paid family leave or through improving housing prospects? To what degree is this within the control of the government to do something about?
I think there is some control. What I would say is that the $5,000 is not going to solve this problem. It's a lot of money for some families, but relative to all this other stuff, are they really going to go have kids for $5,000? My own view is the only way to really solve this problem is to attack these kinds of issues. We have to make people feel like they have the financial ability to afford a kid, or otherwise they're just going to say, I can't do that. And so these are mega challenges that require big changes in government policy, lots of initiatives, not simply $5,000. And at the moment, there does not seem to be any real impetus for doing that down in Washington.
All right, so Steve, we're proving that you can bring us a chart on just about anything. So separate topic, there have been obviously air tragedies, air disasters. We saw an incident the other day where an engine exploded on a Delta flight and people had to jump out the slide and all this. But as we're reminded every time we do one of these stories, flying is safer than it's ever been, broadly speaking. What are the numbers there?
Well, I'm disappointed Mika's not here because I know that Mika is not that fond of flying, shall we say, and I wanted to show Mika that, you know, she's got to deal with the world as it is, not as she might imagine
Steve,
it
don't
is.
worry, she's watching.
Yes, Mika, this one's for you. So, interestingly, contrary to sort of the perception that really started with that terrible Washington crash, flying this year has not been any less safe than in other years. So this compares non-fatal accidents against all accidents over the last, from 2006 to 2024. And it includes private planes as well as commercial planes. And that's why this spikes up like this. A lot of what we call weekend warriors in the flying business come out in the warm weather months and get themselves in trouble doing stuff they shouldn't do. But nonetheless, the pace is no different this year than it's been over this long period of time that I show you here. Fatal accidents are actually running below their historic rate, and so this year is not aberrational. But here's the key point for anyone who's thinking that worrying at all about flying. So we compare the safety rate of flying versus other modes of transport. Motorcycles, as you would imagine, are pretty dangerous. These are injuries per 100 million passenger miles, so still not that many, but motorcycles are tough, buses, cars, trucks. But here's air travel down here at 0.007. So what does this mean? This means that you are 67 times less likely to get injured flying on a commercial plane than getting on a train.
0.007, that's
0.007, and the fatality rate down here at 0.003. We've only had really 2 commercial airplane crashes in this country in the last 15 or more years. The one that just happened, of course, and the one outside Buffalo, and I think it was 2008 or 9.
Yeah.
So it has been an unbelievably safe mode of transport. So to all those of you who take a Valium or worry a lot about getting on a plane, and for you especially, Mika, 0.007, that's your chance.
You can take the Valium if you need to, but just know you're going to get there safely. Morning Joe economic analyst and pilot and so much more, Renaissance man, Steve Rattner. Steve, thanks so much. We always appreciate it. USA Today's Susan Page, her new piece at usatoday.com. Susan, thanks so much.